Heratsi akad, tupriyats, titrajab, et simidraud the sea betterid, trizar to be bin, disrein, trins. Dizandadan, tinbituanads time with its front of the frowned. It front of then a bit its own. It's uprunning. But then it, not because I've forgotten it, but because I've learned that some things don't need to be revisited every day to still be true. What happened, happened. And what we did about it matters more than the thing itself. But some nights, I sit on the back porch with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand, and I hear my son laugh from somewhere inside the house, and the sound hits me different than it used to, like something I almost lost, like something I have to keep earning back by remembering. My son was 9 years old. He played Greek League baseball on Saturday mornings. He had a gap in his front teeth that the new ones hadn't grown in to fill yet, and he still sometimes reached for my hand in parking lots without thinking about it. Then remembered he was almost in 4th grade and pulled away. He was 9. He was fine. That's what I thought. I coached youth baseball for 3 seasons. My name is Frank Alderman. I'm a high school history teacher by profession, 48 years old, divorced, and my son Eli has lived with me full-time since his mother and I split when he was 5. I say all this because I need you to understand the kind of father I thought I was. Present, involved, the kind who notices things. I didn't notice. The first sign was at dinner a Wednesday, 6 weeks before everything came apart. Eli asked if he could quit the travel team, not rec league. The travel team, specifically, the one that practiced Tuesday evenings at the Hargrove Athletic Complex on Route 9, under Coach Devlin Marsh. I remember putting down my fork. Eli loved baseball. He'd been talking about the travel team since 2nd grade. We bought new cleats for it in August. We drove 40 minutes round trip twice a week so we could practice with kids who were serious about the game. You want to quit? Why? He shrugged. Just don't feel like going anymore. Did something happen? No. Is it one of the other kids? No, Dad. I just don't want to go. I told him we'd talk about it more over the weekend. I thought it was just a rough patch. Fatigue, maybe. A disagreement with a teammate he didn't want to get into. Kids go through phases. I was a teacher. I knew that better than most. I should have pushed harder. The second sign was 3 weeks after that. I was doing laundry on a Sunday afternoon, pulling his baseball bag out of the closet to get his uniform in before Monday, and I noticed he'd shoved it toward the back behind his winter coat instead of leaving it in the usual spot by the door. Small thing. I noticed it and then forgot it, the way you forget something that doesn't yet have a category in your brain for what it might mean. The third sign I cannot forgive myself for missing was that he stopped asking to call his grandfather. Illy and my dad talk every Sunday, have since my dad retired and moved to Scottsdale 4 years ago. It was just something they did. For about a month before everything came out, Eli kept saying he didn't feel like it that week. Maybe next week. Can we skip today? My dad mentioned it to me once on our own call. Seems like Eli's been a little down. Everything okay? He's fine, I told my father. Just going through something. He's 9. They do that. He was not fine. The night it came apart was a Saturday in March, about 11:30 p.m. We'd been to a birthday party for one of the kids from his class, and the drive home was quiet, which wasn't unusual. Eli gets tired and goes internal. He sat in the passenger seat. He decided this past fall that he was old enough to sit up front, and stared out the window at the highway lights sliding by. We were about 10 minutes from home when he said quietly and without turning his head, "Dad, I need to tell you something, but I don't know how." I turned the radio down. You can tell me anything, you know that. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "It's about Coach Marsh." I kept my hands on the wheel. My jaw stayed where it was. I said, "Okay, go ahead, take your time." He doesn't drag me home from practice. I knew Marsh gave a few of the kids rides home when parents couldn't make it. I thought nothing of it. I'd thanked him once. You'd thank him too. Illy's voice got smaller. He takes me somewhere else first. The car felt very still. The road was empty and straight, and the headlights pushed into the dark in front of us. And I kept my voice completely even, and I said, "Where does he take you, buddy?" He said the name of a park about 1.5 miles from the athletic complex. It has a parking lot behind the maintenance shed where you can't see the road. Eli looked at his hands. He said if I told anyone, my spot on the team was gone. And he said you'd be embarrassed. He said everyone would think I was lying because he's been coaching for 20 years and everyone knows him and no one would believe a kid. I pulled over, not because I was going to fall apart, but because I needed to not be in motion. I put the car in park and turned to face him and I said, Eli, look at me. He did. Whatever he told you about me being embarrassed, about people not believing you, that's not true. None of that is true. You telling me right now is the bravest thing I have ever watched a person do. And I believe you. Every single word. He nodded. His chin was trembling. He was trying hard not to cry. We didn't go home right away. I drove to the emergency room at Whitmore General, 40 minutes away. I drove past the closer hospital on purpose. I didn't know who Devlin Marsh knew, and I wasn't taking chances. On the way, I called my sister in Portland. She's a nurse. I needed to hear her voice, and I needed to know what to say to Eli in the waiting room. She talked to me while I drove, and she talked to Eli for a few minutes, and then she told me to document everything starting tonight, and not to let anyone minimize what I was hearing. The ER doctor was a tall man named Dr. Gary Ostrander who had white hair and a kind, deliberate manner. He was thorough. He was careful with Eli. He examined him with the nurse present, and he spoke to Eli like he was a real person with real intelligence and real feelings, not just a small body to be assessed and processed. When he pulled me out into the hall, he said that the physical findings were consistent with what Eli had described. He said he was legally required to contact Child Protective Services and that he was also calling the police tonight. Good, I said. He said, the man you named, you said he's been coaching in this county for 2 decades? 22 years. He said, then I want to prepare you for the possibility that this is not going to be quick or easy. He was right. The detective who came in was named Detective Pauline Ochner. She was professional, methodical, and when I said Devlin Marsh's name, her pen kept moving. No flicker of recognition, no social relationship, no pause. She just wrote it down. I was grateful for that. She took Eli's statement over 2 careful sessions using a protocol I later learned was designed specifically for child witnesses. She let him go at his own pace. She didn't push, but when she came back to me 2 days later, her voice was measured in the way that meant I should prepare myself. Mr. Alderman, Devlin Marsh has deep roots in this county. The Hargrove Athletic Complex is partially funded through a foundation his family helped establish. He's known by most of the Parks and Rec leadership. He's been named Volunteer of the Year twice. We're going to investigate this. I want to be clear with you. We are going to investigate. But I want you to understand the environment. I understood the environment. I taught in this county for 16 years. I knew exactly how the environment worked. What I did next was probably not what Detective Ochsner would have recommended, but I wasn't willing to sit and wait while my son struggled to sleep at night and Devlin Marsh kept driving other kids home from practice. I started making calls. I was careful. I didn't accuse anybody of anything. I just talked to other parents, the way you do at the end of a practice session. Leaning against your car, watching the kids pack up their bags. How's your kid doing? Feel like he's been himself lately? Anything on his mind? 3 conversations in 4 days. The first was with a father named Gil Pemberton, whose son Nate had quietly stopped talking about baseball the way he used to. I don't know what it is, Gil said. He used to watch the game on Sunday nights with me, and now he just goes upstairs. I figured it was just a phase. The second was with a mother named Andrea Kowalczyk, whose son had started wetting the bed again after 2 years with no issues. She'd taken him to the pediatrician. Stress, they'd said. Has anything changed at school? She'd been running through every possibility. It hadn't occurred to her to ask about baseball practice. The third was with a divorced mother named Tanya Briggs, whose son had asked her, without context, whether it was okay to hate someone who was nice to other people. She'd thought he meant a kid at school. She'd said, yes. Sometimes people show different faces to different people. She'd moved on. She hadn't moved on now. Talking to me in the parking lot of the grocery store at 7:45 in the evening, her hands wrapped around her car keys. I didn't tell them about Eli. Not yet, but I gave them Detective Ochsner's number. And I told them there was an open investigation and that if their sons had said anything that felt off or if they'd noticed changes they couldn't explain, it was worth a phone call. They all called. In the meantime, I did something else. I don't recommend it legally. I do not regret it. Devlin Marsh coached at 3 different facilities. The Hargrove complex had updated its security camera system the previous fall. I'd seen the installation crew there in September. I am not a software engineer. I teach 11th grade American history, and I coach JV soccer. But I have a brother-in-law who works in network infrastructure and who, when I explained what was happening, drove 3 hours to sit with me at my kitchen table at midnight with a laptop. It took us 2 hours. The system's admin password was the same as the default from the manufacturer. People count on small towns feeling safe. What we found was not the worst thing it could have been. But it was enough. Marsh arriving at the complex early before any of the kids. Marsh walking certain boys out to the parking lot separately after practice. Marsh's car parked at the far end of the lot, away from the lights. None of it was definitive on its own. But it was a pattern, and it corroborated what Eli had described about the sequence, the timing, the parking lot routine. I copied everything to 3 separate drives. I gave one to Detective Auctioner. I kept one. I gave one to the lawyer my sister found me. A woman named Irene Stackhouse, who worked in Portland and had spent 15 years on cases exactly like this. She looked at the footage, and she looked at me, and she said, "This is good. Don't do any more of this. We have what we need." Then she asked if I'd be willing to present what I had at a public county parks and rec board meeting that was scheduled for the following Thursday. She said the police investigation was moving, but slowly, and that public pressure would matter. I said yes. The meeting was held at the County Administration Building on Fletcher Road. The room was full, more full than I expected, which told me the word had gotten out faster than I'd planned. I recognized coaches, parents, a couple of local reporters. In the back row, arms folded, face relaxed, sat Devlin Marsh. When the public comment section opened, I walked to the podium. My name is Frank Alderman. I'm a parent of a child on the Hargrove travel team. I'm also a county resident and a teacher at Jefferson High. 3 weeks ago, my 9-year-old son disclosed to me that he had been taken to an isolated location by his travel coach after practice on multiple occasions and harmed. The coach is Devlin Marsh. I have provided a statement to the police and to Child Protective Services. I also have security footage from the Hargrove complex showing a pattern of behavior consistent with my son's account. I am submitting that footage tonight to this board. The room didn't explode the way I'd seen in movies. It went very quiet. Then it got loud in the slow way. Crowds get loud when they're processing something real. The board chair, a man named Fred Whitaker, started to say something about procedures and appropriate channels. I kept talking. I am aware of the appropriate channels, I said. I used them. The appropriate channels have allowed this man to keep showing up at that complex and driving children home for the last 3 weeks. I'm standing here because my son wakes up at night. I'm standing here because there are other children who haven't told their parents yet, and I'm standing here because men who are well known in this community count on everyone assuming that the institution protects the child. Tonight I am asking this board to prove that it does. I distributed the evidence packets, the medical documentation, the footage summary from Irene, the accounts Detective Auctioner had given me permission to reference publicly. 3 other parents stood up after me. Andrea Kowalczyk, Gil Pemberton, and a man named Steve Bautista, who I hadn't spoken to, who stood up and said his son had told him something 18 months ago and he let the rec department handle it, and the rec department had said it was a misunderstanding and he had believed them, and he had spent every day since wondering if he should have pushed harder. The board voted that night to suspend Marsh's coaching credentials pending the investigation. They also announced an independent review of the rec department's handling of prior complaints. Marsh was arrested 11 days later. Irene told me the timeline of how these things normally move. This was fast. The public meeting had mattered. The additional families coming forward had mattered. The footage had mattered. The charges covered 4 children. Eli, Nate Pemberton, Tanya Briggs' son, and a child from a neighboring county whose family had moved away 8 months earlier and who came forward after seeing a local news story about the arrest. The trial was 7 months after that. Irene and Detective Auctioner prepared Eli carefully, patiently. He did not have to appear in person. His video testimony was recorded in a comfortable room with no cameras visible, just a kind interviewer asking careful questions. I watched it once the night before the trial began, and then I did not watch it again because I needed to stay functional. The defense presented Marsh as a pillar of the community. They talked about 22 years of service. They produced parents who called him a dedicated mentor. They questioned the chain of custody on the footage and argued it had been obtained illegally. Irene had prepared for every angle. She argued the footage was submitted voluntarily and was corroborative, not primary. She pointed out that the defense was spending more time protecting an adult's reputation than addressing 4 children's accounts. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Devlin Marsh was convicted on 9 counts. He was sentenced to 17 years without possibility of parole on the primary charges. The judge made note of the specific vulnerability of the victims he had selected. Children from single-parent homes, children newer to the team, children who were less likely to be automatically believed. The Hargrove Foundation quietly restructured its board. Fred Whitaker stepped down from the Parks and Rec Board. The department implemented a new policy requiring 2 adults to be present any time a child was transported by a coach. Background check protocols were updated. It wasn't enough. It was a start. Eli is 12 now. He switched to soccer. He's actually good at it. Better than at baseball, it turns out, which might have been true the whole time and we just didn't know yet. He sees a therapist named Dr. Ver, Anita Robles, every 2 weeks. And he's been seeing her since the week after everything came out. In the first few months, he had nightmares regularly, some of them bad. He was afraid of cars at night. He didn't trust men in authority the way he had before, which is not entirely a bad thing, but in a 9-year-old boy it was heartbreaking to witness. He came back slowly, not in a single moment, but in small accumulations. The first soccer practice he looked forward to instead of dreading. The first Sunday he called my dad without me suggesting it. The first time he laughed at something completely stupid on TV, and then looked at me, and we both kept laughing for too long and neither of us knew why. He knows why he's resilient. He told me one evening when we were driving home from one of his games. He'd scored a goal. He was feeling good. He said, "I think I'm okay, Dad. I think I'm going to be okay." I said, "I know you are." He said, "Because I told you. That's why. If I hadn't told you, I think I'd still be carrying it. Telling someone is the thing," I said. He nodded. He looked out at the road. He said, "I used to think no one would believe me." He told me that, and I almost believed it. I want to sit with that for a second. A grown man who coached youth sports for over 2 decades counted on a 9-year-old believing that his own father would not believe him. That was the mechanism. Not physical force alone, not one incident. The mechanism was convincing a child that the truth in his mouth was already worthless, that the word of the institution would always outweigh his own word. That is what I think about when I talk to other parents now. I do talk to other parents. Irene connected me with a family advocacy group that works with county youth sports organizations on training and policy. I've sat in on 3 county-level panels in the last 2 years speaking about what happened and what other parents can watch for. I'm not an expert. I'm a history teacher who happens to have lived through something, but sometimes that's enough to make a room pay attention. Here is what I have learned that I did not know before. Children do not lie about this. I know that is hard to sit with. I know it is much more comfortable to believe that a child has misunderstood something, or that a well-regarded adult would not do such things, or that the situation will resolve itself through proper channels. But the research is clear, and more importantly, my own experience is clear. Children do not typically disclose abuse for attention. They disclose it after a long period of carrying it alone, usually when something makes them feel just safe enough to take the risk. When they do, the worst thing you can do is hesitate. The second thing is this. Reputation is a tool. Not always a weapon, but a tool that can be used to protect people who should not be protected. The person in your community who everyone knows, who has coached 22 years, who volunteers, who chairs committees. That person is not exempt from wrongdoing by virtue of being well known. In fact, positions of visibility and trust are exactly the positions that can attract people who intend harm. Do not let reputation be a wall between your child and your belief. Third, the systems will often move slowly, and sometimes they will not move at all until pressure is applied. Document everything. Get a lawyer early. Find the detective or investigator who has no social relationship with the accused, and give them everything you have. And if the official channels stall, consider what else can be done. I cannot tell you to do what I did, but I will tell you that I did it, and I do not regret it. Fourth, and this is the one I come back to most often, create the conditions before you need them. Talk to your children now before anything happens. Tell them that their body belongs to them. Tell them that any adult who tells them to keep a secret about something that hurt them is wrong, no matter who that adult is. Tell them specifically that if something like this ever happens, you will not be embarrassed. You will not be embarrassed. You will not be angry at them. You will believe them. Say it out loud. Say it more than once. Because Devlin Marsh bet his entire operation on Eli believing I would be embarrassed, he was wrong. But that was almost not enough. My son is 12. He's going to be okay. He already is, most days. He knows that speaking up when it was terrifying was a form of courage that I will spend the rest of my life telling him about. He knows that I believe him. He will always know that. There is a letter in my desk drawer from Tanya Briggs. She wrote it by hand, 3 paragraphs on notebook paper, 3 months after the verdict. The last line says, "Because you stood up and said his name in that room, I found the courage to let my son say it too. I want you to know his nightmares stopped 6 weeks ago. That letter is why I stayed in that county instead of moving somewhere quieter. It is why I still drive to the occasional panel discussion at the Reese Center or the school board meeting when they're reviewing safety policies. It is not because I am brave. It is because my son showed me what brave actually looks like, in a car on a dark highway, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, with his chin trembling and his hands in his lap. He said, 'I need to tell you something, but I don't know how.' And everything that happened after, everything difficult and slow and painful and ultimately right, started with me saying, 'Okay, I'm listening. Take your time. That's it. That's the whole thing. Listen to your children. They are telling you the truth.' I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not in a mystical way. Not in the sense that the universe was arranging things, or that some invisible force was balancing scales, just in the plain, honest way that a history teacher thinks about it. Actions produce consequences, and the consequences of silence are just as real as the consequences of speaking. Devlin Marsh spent 22 years building something. Not just a coaching career, a shield. Every award, every handshake, every volunteer hour was a brick in a wall that was designed to make the truth about him harder to reach. And for a long time, it worked. It worked on me. On other parents, on the parents before us who filed complaints that got buried, the shield held because we let it hold. Not out of malice, out of the ordinary human instinct to trust someone the community has already decided is trustworthy. That instinct almost cost my son everything. What I understand now, on the other side of all of it, is that the shield only works when children stay silent. And children stay silent when they believe, when they have been deliberately taught to believe. That their word means less than the word of an adult with a title and a reputation. Marsh didn't just harm Eli physically. He spent months building a specific lie inside my son's head. That I would be embarrassed by him, that no one would believe him, that speaking up would cost him more than staying quiet. That lie was the real weapon. The rest of it was made possible by the lie, so when Eli finally spoke, in the dark of that car on Route 9, with his chin trembling and his hands in his lap, he wasn't just telling me what had happened. He was choosing to believe something different than what he'd been told. He was betting, against everything Marsh had tried to plant in him, that I would show up the way a father is supposed to show up. That took more courage than anything I have ever done in my life. I want to be clear about that. He was 9 years old, and he was braver than I knew how to be at 9 or 20 or 35. What I did after, the late nights, the evidence, the lawyer, the public meeting, none of that required courage the way Eli's disclosure did. Mine required stubbornness, a willingness to be inconvenient, to make people uncomfortable, to sit in a room where someone I used to respect was watching me with folded arms and say his name out loud anyway. That's not the same thing as courage. Courage is what Eli did. Stubbornness is what I had left after the fear burned off. I think about the other boys too. Nate Pemberton, who had stopped watching baseball with his dad on Sunday nights. Tanya Briggs's son, who asked his mother whether it was okay to hate someone who seemed nice to other people. Children carrying things alone because the world had taught them. or someone had taught them specifically, that the truth in their mouths was already worthless. The truth was not worthless. It was the only thing that eventually mattered. If there is a lesson I have earned the right to pass on, it is this. What you build in your children before the hard thing happens is what they will reach for when the hard thing comes. I had told Eli more than once, in ordinary moments, that he could tell me anything. I meant it when I said it, but I didn't know I was building something structural. I didn't know that one day he would test it under real conditions, in the dark, on a highway, with everything on the line. He reached for it. It held. Build it early. Say it out loud. Mean it, before you need it to be true.